The Alabama heat pressed down like a heavy blanket as our car pulled into the cracked parking lot of the abandoned train station. I was 16, headphones around my neck, still half asleep from the long drive back from visiting my sister Vivian at college. The weekend had been typical Vivian pretending everything was fine, Mom making passive aggressive comments about my attitude, and Dad drinking steadily through each meal while talking about his glory days in the military. Magnus Holloway had been a different man before the war. Or so the stories went. The man who came back from Afghanistan was harder, angrier, numbed by alcohol and haunted by things he never talked about. Losing his job at the factory 2 years ago had only made things worse. Mom Celeste handled his decline about as well as she handled everything else that didn't match her vision of what life should be. She'd grown up wealthy, the daughter of a prominent family, and our modest existence felt like a personal insult to her. "Get me a soda," Dad said without looking back, his voice carrying that edge it always had these days. "And grab your mother some water." I sighed, pushing open the car door. The heat hit me immediately, rising off the asphalt in shimmering waves. The vending machines sat beside the station entrance, their faded decals peeling from years of sun exposure. I fed crumpled bills into the slots, listening to the machines groan and struggle before finally dispensing lukewarm drinks. When I turned around, bottles in hand, the parking lot was empty. For a moment, my brain refused to process what I was seeing. Maybe they'd moved to find shade. Maybe Dad was checking something under the hood. I took a few steps forward, scanning the empty spaces, my heart beginning to race. Then my phone buzzed, a text from Mom. "Let's see how long it takes you to get home. Consider this a test of your independence. You've been saying you want to be treated like an adult, prove it." I stared at the screen, reading the message again and again. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a joke. They had planned this. I called Dad's number, straight to voicemail. Mom's phone, the same hollow beep, standing there in that empty lot, gripping those sodas so tight the plastic crinkled. I felt something cold settle over me. Not shock, not devastation, something eerily like relief. This wasn't the first time they'd used tough love to make a point. When I was 13, they'd locked me out during a thunderstorm because I'd forgotten to take out the trash. At 14, they'd made me walk 6 miles home in the rain as punishment for missing the bus. But this abandoning me hours from home with nothing but my wallet, this was a new level. "They think they're teaching me something," I whispered to myself. Looking around at the handful of strangers moving through the station, they had no idea what they'd just unleashed. I checked my pocket $140 from my summer job. Not much, but enough. The old man behind the ticket counter barely glanced up when I approached. "Where's the nearest bus station?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. "Couple miles that way." He pointed down the road. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Mom. "Don't you dare call your aunt. Your father says you need to figure this out on your own." I blocked the number, then did exactly what they'd told me not to do. The phone rang twice before a familiar voice answered. "Abigail, Aunt Marigold." I swallowed hard, my voice cracking for the first time. "Can you help me?" There was a pause, then a sharp intake of breath. "Where are you, sweetheart?" "They left me," I said simply. "At a train station. They just drove away." "Stay right there." Marigold's voice was fierce with protective anger. "I'm coming to get you." As I waited in that parking lot, watching the sun begin to set over the abandoned tracks, I made a promise to myself. I would never again be at the mercy of people who were supposed to love me. I would never again be that lost 16-year-old girl, abandoned and alone. I had no idea then how much that promise would cost me. Aunt Marigold arrived 6 hours later, her face drawn with worry and rage. She was my mother's older sister, but they couldn't have been more different. Where Celeste was all sharp edges and barely contained fury, Marigold was warm, steady, real. She'd cut ties with my parents years ago after witnessing too many of their lessons. "I should have done this sooner," she said as we drove through the night toward California, my few belongings stuffed into a garbage bag in her back seat. "I should have gotten you out of there long ago." "Why didn't you?" I asked, not accusingly, just curious. Marigold was quiet for a long moment, because I kept hoping they'd change, because Celeste is my sister, and I remember who she used to be before life disappointed her so much that she forgot how to love. The drive to her small house in San Diego took 3 days. During those long hours on the road, Marigold told me about her life, how she'd left Alabama at 18, worked her way through nursing school, built a quiet but fulfilling life helping others heal. She didn't try to explain my parents' behavior or make excuses for them. She just listened when I needed to talk and let me sit in silence when words felt too heavy. "You can stay as long as you need," she said as we pulled into her driveway. "But I have one condition: you finish high school and you think about college. Don't let their poison stop you from becoming who you're meant to be." Starting over at 16 wasn't easy. The new school, new state, new identity as Marigold's niece who had some family troubles felt surreal. But there was something liberating about it too. For the first time in my life, I could define myself by my own actions rather than my parents' expectations. I threw myself into work and school with an intensity that sometimes worried Marigold. I had a part-time job at a local real estate office, filing papers and answering phones, but I absorbed everything around me: how deals were structured, what made properties valuable, how to read people's needs and motivations. "You're building armor," Marigold observed one evening, finding me hunched over homework at midnight. "But make sure it doesn't become a prison." She was right, of course. I was building armor, layer by layer, determined never to be vulnerable again. But I was also building something else: a vision of who I could become. College came with a full scholarship to UC San Diego, where I double majored in business and psychology. The psychology wasn't just academic curiosity. I needed to understand what had happened to my family, what had broken so badly that love became conditional on performance and punishment became parenting. In my sophomore year, I legally changed my name to Abigail Rivers, taking Marigold's surname. The day the papers were finalized, I felt something inside me settle, like a bone that had been broken was finally healing straight. Therapy helped too, though it took months before I could talk about the train station without my hands shaking. Dr. Martinez was patient, helping me understand that trauma doesn't just disappear, it transforms. You can either let it poison you or let it fuel you. I chose fuel. My business ventures started small, flipping a tiny condo with money I'd saved from work-study jobs. Then another. Then partnering with classmates on bigger projects. By graduation, I had enough capital to move to Austin and start Rivers Development. The company focused on affordable housing, creating beautiful spaces for people who had been overlooked by the market. There was irony in the fact that I was building homes for others when my own family had made me homeless. But it felt right. Every project was proof that broken things could be rebuilt, that abandoned spaces could become something beautiful. I kept in minimal contact with Vivian through social media, watching from a distance as she finished college, became a social worker, married a nice man named David. She never mentioned our parents, and I never asked. Some wounds were better left alone. For 20 years, this worked. I built a successful company, maintained a small circle of close friends, dated occasionally, but never let anyone too close. Marigold was my family, and that was enough. Then the past came calling. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in March, delivered by hand to my office reception. My assistant, Jenny, brought it to me with a puzzled expression. "No return address," she said, setting the cream-colored envelope on my desk. "But it's addressed to Abigail Holloway." I hadn't used that name in 20 years. Inside was a single sheet of expensive stationery, written in my mother's careful script. "My dearest Abigail, I know it's been far too long since we've spoken. Your father and I have missed you every single day. We've followed your success from afar. We're so proud of what you've accomplished. We understand if you're angry, but we're hoping you might find it in your heart to forgive us. We'd love nothing more than to be part of your life again. All our love, Mother." Tucked behind the letter was a photograph our family at Christmas. Me about 14, all of us smiling for the camera. I remembered that day, the fight that had erupted an hour after the photo was taken, the way Dad had thrown the presents across the room when dinner wasn't ready on time. I set the letter aside and tried to focus on work, but my hands were shaking. By afternoon, I'd received a phone call from an unknown Alabama number, then another. I let them go to voicemail. That evening, sitting in my Austin apartment with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city I'd helped build, I finally listened to the messages. "Abigail, sweetheart, it's Mom. Please call us back. We just want to hear your voice." The second message was Magnus. "Your mother's been crying all day, 20 years. Abigail, don't you think that's long enough?" I deleted both messages, but sleep didn't come easily that night. They'd found me through a business journal article about young entrepreneurs, complete with a photo of me standing in front of my latest development project. Said. The article mentioned my full name, something I'd grown careless about over the years, and apparently that was all they needed. Over the next week, the letters kept coming, each one more emotionally manipulative than the last. They talked about regret, about missing holidays, about wanting to meet their future grandchildren. They enclosed more photos, including one of me as a baby that made my chest tight with unwanted emotions. But what disturbed me most was how they framed their abandonment. In their version of events, they'd given me space to grow and trusted me to find my way. The train station incident had been rewritten into some kind of character-building exercise that had ultimately led to my success. They weren't taking responsibility. They were taking credit. The call from Vivian came on a Thursday evening, her name lighting up my phone screen like a ghost from another life. "Abby, please don't hang up." I almost did. Instead, I found myself saying, "It's Abigail now." "Right. God, I don't even know where to start." Vivian's voice was older, tireder than I remembered. "I know they've been trying to reach you. You knew about this. They made me tell them where you were. I'm sorry. I tried to talk them out of it, but—" She trailed off, and I could hear the old Vivian in that silence, the peacekeeper, the one who smoothed things over, who took responsibility for everyone else's emotions. "What do they want, Viv?" Another pause. "Money, mostly. Dad's gambling got bad after you left. They lost the house, their savings, everything. Mom's been working retail, but it's not enough, and now they're both in their 70s. And they thought I'd just write them a check after everything." I told them it wasn't that simple. Vivian's voice cracked slightly. "But they don't see it that way. In their minds, you owe them. They keep saying they sacrificed everything for us, that they deserve something back." I laughed, a bitter sound that echoed in my empty apartment. "Sacrificed everything, they abandoned me at a train station. Viv." "I know." Her voice was barely a whisper. "I know, and I'm sorry. I should have done something then. I should have—" You were in college. You were just a kid, too. We talked for an hour, the conversation meandering through 20 years of silence. Vivian told me about her work with Child Protective Services, her marriage, her struggles with anxiety and depression that she traced back to our childhood. She'd stayed in contact with our parents out of obligation, visiting them once a year, sending money when she could afford it. I keep thinking that if I'm good enough, if I help enough, maybe they'll finally be proud of me. She admitted. It's stupid. I know. It's not stupid. It's human. Before we hung up, Vivian asked if I'd consider meeting with them. Just once, she said, just to hear them out. I told her I'd think about it, but I'd already made my decision. Some bridges were meant to stay burned when letters and phone calls didn't work. Magnus and Celeste escalated. The first surprise came in the form of a package delivered to my office, my old teddy bear, the one I'd left behind 20 years ago, along with a note, Mr. Buttons missed you. We all did. I threw it in the trash, but the memory hit me like a physical blow. I was 7 years old, crying into that bear's matted fur after another of their lessons, promising him that someday we'd both escape. The packages kept coming. School photos, report cards they'd saved, a Mother's Day card I'd made in elementary school, each one designed to trigger guilt, to remind me of the child I'd been before I learned to protect myself. Then came the medical emergency. Vivian called me at 2 a.m., sobbing. Mom's in the hospital, heart attack. They don't think, and oh God, Abby, she's asking for you. I was on a plane to Alabama before sunrise, my heart pounding with an emotion I couldn't name. The flight felt endless, memories flooding back with each mile that brought me closer to home. What if she died before I could? What forgive her, get closure? I didn't even know what I wanted. The hospital was exactly as I remembered Alabama hospitals, understaffed, overworked, filled with the kind of exhausted desperation that permeated everything in that state. I found Vivian in the cardiac unit waiting room, her eyes red with tears. How is she? I asked. Vivian looked confused. How is who? Mom, the heart attack. My sister stared at me for a long moment. Then understanding dawned in her eyes. Abby, there was no heart attack. She's fine. She's at home. The betrayal hit me like a punch to the stomach. You lied to me? No, I didn't know. They told me. Vivian's voice broke. Oh God, they used me. They knew I'd call you, and they knew you'd come if you thought. I turned and walked out of that hospital, out of that state, out of their lives again. But the damage was done. They'd proven they could still reach me, still manipulate my emotions. Worse, they'd turned Vivian into an unwitting accomplice. The social media campaign started the next week. It began subtly posts about ungrateful children and broken families shared on local Alabama Facebook groups. Then came the photos, old family pictures with captions about the daughter who forgot where she came from. They painted themselves as victims, elderly parents abandoned by their successful child who'd forgotten her roots. The posts were carefully crafted, designed to generate sympathy. They mentioned my success but framed it as something they'd enabled through their sacrifices. They talked about wanting to reconcile, but being shut out by my coldness. Within days, the story had been picked up by local news. Austin businesswoman abandons elderly parents, read one headline. Another, the price of success when children leave family behind. My phone started ringing with interview requests. Strangers on Twitter were calling me heartless. Someone had found my company's Yelp page and filled it with one-star reviews about my moral character. But the real blow came when they hired a PR firm. I learned about it when Jenny showed me an article in a national publication, The Other Side of the American Dream: What Happens to the Families Left Behind. It was a carefully crafted piece that portrayed my parents as victims of their daughter's ambition, elderly and struggling, while I lived in luxury. The article included quotes from family friends paid. I was sure and carefully selected details about my childhood that made me sound like a spoiled brat who'd never appreciated her parents' hard work. There was even a quote from Magnus about how they'd tried to teach me independence by encouraging me to find my own way home. That one summer, their final spin on the train station incident, the comments section was brutal. Thousands of strangers condemning me as selfish, greedy, ungrateful. My company's website crashed from the traffic, and my assistant fielded dozens of angry calls. But what broke my heart was the effect on my employees. These were good people who'd worked hard to build something meaningful, and now they were being attacked by association. Three of my project managers asked to meet with me privately, their faces grave with concern. "We believe in you, Abigail." Sarah, my oldest employee, said carefully, "But this is affecting morale. People are scared about their jobs, about the company's reputation. We need to know, is any of this true?" I realized then that my parents hadn't just declared war on me. They declared war on everything I'd built, everyone who depended on me, and that was something I couldn't forgive. They showed up at my apartment on a Saturday morning in May. I was in my pajamas, drinking coffee and reading on my balcony when the building's concierge called. "Ms. Rivers, there's an elderly couple here claiming to be your parents. They don't have an appointment, but they're quite insistent." My blood ran cold. "Don't let them up. I'm afraid they've already." They said it was a family emergency and slipped past security. They're in the elevator now. I had 30 seconds to prepare for a confrontation I'd been avoiding for 20 years. When the knock came, I almost didn't answer, but hiding felt like giving them power they didn't deserve. I opened the door to find them standing in my hallway, Magnus and Celeste, aged and weathered, but still carrying themselves with that entitled arrogance I remembered so well. "Hello, Abigail," my mother said, as if she'd seen me yesterday. "May we come in?" I didn't move from the doorway. "How did you get my address?" "We have our ways," Magnus said, his voice carrying that familiar edge of threat. "Are you going to invite your parents in? Or are we going to have this conversation in the hallway?" Against my better judgment, I stepped aside. They entered my space like they owned it, Magnus immediately heading for the windows to examine the view, while Celeste made a show of looking around at my furniture, my art, my mud. "Very nice," she said with false sweetness. "Success suits you." "What do you want?" I asked, not offering them seats. They exchanged a look, some silent communication passing between them. Then Celeste launched into a performance worthy of an Oscar tears, trembling hands, the whole production. "We just want our daughter back," she sobbed. "We've made mistakes. We know that, but we're family. We're getting old, Abigail." "We don't have much time left." I watched her cry and felt nothing. 20 years of therapy, of healing, of building a life, it had all led to this moment of absolute clarity. I wasn't that 16-year-old girl anymore. "You want to know what I remember about family," I said, my voice steady. "I remember being locked outside in the rain. I remember walking home from school because you thought I needed to build character. I remember standing in an empty parking lot at 16, abandoned by the people who were supposed to love me." Magnus stepped forward, his face flushing red. "We were trying to make you strong. Look at you now, successful, independent. You think you would have achieved any of this if we'd coddled you. I achieved this despite you, not because of you." "Bullshit." The mask slipped completely, revealing the angry, bitter man I remembered. Everything you are, everything you have, started with us. We made you tough enough to survive. I laughed, a sound without humor. You made me tough enough to survive you. There's a difference. Celeste stopped crying instantly, her expression hardening. We don't want much, Abigail, just enough to get back on our feet. A small loan to help with the house, maybe a monthly allowance. After everything we've done for you, after everything you've done to me, it's the least you can do. I walked to my front door and opened it. Get out. Neither of them moved. We're not leaving until we settle this, Magnus said, sitting down heavily on my couch like he planned to stay. We're your parents, God damn it. You deserve nothing. My voice cut through his bluster like a blade. You forfeited any claim to my life the day you drove away from that train station. Celeste's face twisted into something ugly. You were always ungrateful, always selfish. We should have left you there permanently. The words hung in the air between us, and I saw the moment she realized what she'd just admitted. Not that they'd made a mistake, not that they'd acted in anger, that they'd considered abandoning me forever. Thank you, I said quietly. She looked confused. For what? For finally being honest. I called building security. It took 3 guards to escort them out. Magnus shouting threats the entire way, while Celeste maintained her victim act for the growing crowd of neighbors who'd come to watch the spectacle. As the elevator doors closed on them, Magnus looked directly at me and mouthed words that made my blood freeze. This isn't over. He was right. The lawsuit arrived by courier on Monday morning, thick with official letterhead and legal jargon. But the gist was simple. Magnus and Celeste Holloway were suing their daughter for elder abuse, emotional distress, and financial abandonment. It's a nuisance suit, my lawyer David explained over lunch that day. They don't have a real case, but they can make your life miserable for months, maybe years. The goal isn't to win, it's to force you into a settlement. What kind of settlement? Based on their demands, $500,000, plus ongoing monthly payments. David shook his head. The interesting thing is how they're funding this. The law firm they hired isn't cheap, and your parents are supposedly broke. That mystery was solved when Vivian called me that evening, her voice strained with exhaustion. They mortgaged the house, she said without preamble. The one they're claiming they're about to lose. They took out a reverse mortgage to pay for lawyers and that PR firm. They're betting everything on this lawsuit. Jesus, Viv, it gets worse. They've been telling people, relatives, family friends, anyone who'll listen, that you're mentally unstable, that your abandonment issues have made you incapable of normal family relationships. They're building a narrative. I leaned back in my chair, staring out at the Austin skyline. Let them. Abigail, you don't understand. They're not just going after you. They're going after your business, your reputation, everything. Mom hired some investigator to dig up dirt on your personal life. There's nothing to find. That's not the point. The point is they're trying to destroy you. The discovery phase of the lawsuit was brutal. My parents' lawyer, a small-time ambulance chaser who specialized in elder law, subpoenaed everything: my financial records, my therapy notes, my business correspondence. They were looking for any evidence that I was financially capable of supporting them and emotionally obligated to do so. But discovery worked both ways. My team found records of Magnus's gambling debts, documentation of the loans they'd taken out using my success as collateral, and a paper trail of the money they'd spent on their campaign against me. More importantly, we found witnesses. Dr. Peters, my old pediatrician, testified about the injuries I'd sustained as a child, not from abuse, exactly, but from accidents that happened with suspicious frequency. A former neighbor remembered the night they'd locked me outside in the storm. Most damaging of all, We found school records documenting my frequent absences and the teacher's concerns about my home life. The picture that emerged wasn't of loving parents who'd made a single mistake, but of a pattern of emotional manipulation and psychological abuse that stretched back years. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source, Aunt Marigold. She flew to Austin for the deposition, her face grim with determination. At 72, she was still formidable, and she came prepared for war. "I've been waiting 20 years to tell this story," she said as she was sworn in. What followed was devastating testimony about my parents' treatment of both their daughters. Marigold had documentation photos, medical records, even recordings she'd made of phone conversations where Celeste bragged about her creative parenting methods. The most damning piece of evidence was a letter Celeste had written to Marigold shortly after I'd left, boasting about how the train station incident had finally gotten rid of the problem child. In her own words, she described me as defective and ungrateful and expressed relief that they no longer had to deal with me. But the real bombshell came when Marigold revealed something I'd never known they'd done this before. Vivian was 14 the first time, Marigold testified, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. They left her at a shopping mall in Birmingham as punishment for failing a test. She was missing for 6 hours before the police found her and called me. I threatened to report them to child services if it happened again. I felt the air leave my lungs. Vivian had never told me. The difference, Marigold continued, was that Vivian came home. She was so terrified of being abandoned again that she became the perfect, compliant daughter. When they did it to Abigail 2 years later, they expected the same result. They never imagined she'd be strong enough to walk away. During a break in the proceedings, I confronted Vivian in the courthouse hallway. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked. She couldn't meet my eyes. "Because I was ashamed, because I went back to them, and you didn't, and that made you braver than me." "Viv." "No, let me finish." She finally looked at me, tears streaming down her face. "I've spent 20 years making excuses for them, trying to earn their love by being the daughter they wanted. But watching this, hearing what they really think of us, I'm done." "What does that mean?" She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "It means I'm moving to Austin. It means I'm cutting them off. It means I'm finally going to be the sister you deserved." The settlement conference was held on a gray October morning in a sterile conference room that smelled of old coffee and broken dreams. My parents sat across from me with their lawyer, looking smaller somehow, diminished by months of legal proceedings that had stripped away their carefully constructed narrative. The mediator, a tired-looking woman named Judge Morrison, reviewed the case with the kind of weariness that suggested she'd seen this particular family drama too many times before. "This is your opportunity to resolve this matter without going to trial," she said, looking directly at my parents. "I've reviewed the evidence from both sides, and I have to tell you, Mr. and Mrs. Holloway, your case is weak, very weak." Magnus shifted in his seat, his face flushed with anger and humiliation. "She's our daughter. She owes us something. Actually, Mr. Holloway, she doesn't." Judge Morrison's voice was firm. "Texas doesn't have filial responsibility laws, and even if it did, the evidence suggests a pattern of emotional abandonment on your part that would nullify any obligation." My mother tried to speak, but the judge held up a hand. "However," she continued, "Ms. Rivers has indicated she's willing to make a one-time payment to resolve this matter and avoid the expense of trial. Would you like to hear her offer?" I had wrestled with this decision for weeks. David had advised against any settlement, arguing that it would only validate their claims. But I wasn't thinking about legal strategy anymore. I was thinking about closure. "I'll pay for therapy," I said, my voice steady. for both of you. 1 year of intensive counseling with a qualified professional who specializes in family trauma. I'll also pay to relocate you to a senior living facility in a different state, far enough away that you can't show up at my home or office again. Magnus laughed bitterly. Therapy? You think we're crazy. I think you're broken, I said simply. And I think you broke your children in the process. This is my offer. Take it or leave it. Celeste leaned forward, her eyes glittering with familiar manipulation. We don't want charity, Abigail. We want a relationship with our daughter. No, I said, and the word felt like freedom. You want control. You want to claim credit for my success while avoiding responsibility for your failures. You want me to validate your version of events where you were good parents who just made one tiny mistake. I stood up, gathering my papers. I was 16 years old when you drove away from that train station. I stood there for hours, scared and alone, calling your phones and getting voicemail. I finally understood that day that your love was conditional, that I was only valuable to you when I was useful. My voice never wavered, never broke. 20 years of therapy had led to this moment of absolute clarity. I forgive you, I continued, not because you deserve it, but because I deserve peace. But forgiveness doesn't mean reconciliation. It doesn't mean I owe you a place in my life. You made your choice that day, and I'm making mine now. I turned to leave, then stopped. The therapy offer stands for 30 days. After that, we're done forever. I walked out of that conference room feeling lighter than I had in decades. Vivian moved to Austin 2 weeks later, renting a small apartment near downtown while she looked for work with the Texas Department of Family Services. We started having dinner once a week, awkward at first, but gradually finding our way back to each other. I keep waiting for them to call, she admitted one evening over Thai food. Isn't that pathetic, 20 years of abuse? And I still feel guilty for cutting them off. It's not pathetic. It's human. I poured more wine for both of us. Trauma bonds are real, Viv. Just because you understand intellectually that they were wrong doesn't mean the emotional programming disappears overnight. She looked at me with something like wonder. When did you get so wise? Therapy. Lots and lots of therapy. We talked about everything those first few months our childhood, our coping mechanisms, the different ways we tried to earn love from people incapable of giving it freely. Vivian had become a social worker, partly to understand her own family dynamics, while I'd built a business creating homes for people who needed them. We both became caregivers, she observed one day, just in different ways. The breakthrough in our relationship came when we decided to attend therapy together. Dr. Martinez, who'd helped me through my initial healing 20 years ago, facilitated sessions where we could address not just our relationships with our parents, but the way their dysfunction had affected our bond as sisters. You protected yourself by leaving, she told Vivian during one session. And you protected yourself by staying. Neither choice was wrong, they were survival strategies. But now you have the opportunity to choose each other. It wasn't easy. Vivian struggled with guilt and anxiety, while I fought against my instinct to keep everyone at arm's length. But slowly, we began to heal the relationship that our parents' toxicity had damaged. 1 year later, I stood in the parking lot of that abandoned train station in Alabama. But this time, I wasn't alone. Vivian was beside me, along with a team of architects and contractors. The rusted vending machines were gone, replaced by construction equipment and stacks of building materials. Are you sure about this? Vivian asked, squeezing my hand. I looked at the plans in my other hand, a community center designed to provide resources for at-risk youth and families in crisis. It would offer counseling services, job training, emergency assistance, and most importantly, a safe place for kids who needed somewhere to go. I'm sure, I said. This place was where my old life ended. It feels right to make it where new lives can begin. The project would take 18 months to complete, funded entirely by Rivers Development. It wasn't about my parents. They'd taken the therapy offer and moved to a retirement community in Florida, where they continued to blame everyone but themselves for their problems. It wasn't about revenge or redemption. It was about transformation. The local news covered the groundbreaking ceremony, interviewing me about my generous donation to the community. I kept my answers simple. Sometimes broken places could be rebuilt into something beautiful, and everyone deserved a second chance at finding their way home. That evening, Vivian and I had dinner at a diner near the construction site, Kim. She'd found love with a kind man who understood her history and supported her healing. I was dating someone too, a therapist named Michael who taught me that vulnerability wasn't weakness and that healthy relationships were built on mutual respect, not power dynamics. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you'd gone back that day? Vivian asked, cutting into her pie. If you'd called them from the train station and begged them to come get you, I considered the question seriously. I think I would have spent the rest of my life trying to earn their approval. I think I would have become smaller and smaller until there was nothing left of me. And now, I looked around the diner at the families sharing meals, the teenagers laughing over milkshakes, the ordinary magic of people choosing to care for each other. Now I know the difference between love and control. Now I have a family I chose, not one I was born into. Vivian smiled, the first genuinely happy expression I'd seen on her face in decades. I like our family better. Me too. As we drove back to Austin that night, I thought about the community center that would rise from that abandoned lot. Kids would come there when home wasn't safe, when they needed someone to listen, when they felt lost and alone. And maybe some of them would learn what I'd learned that day 20 years ago, that being abandoned doesn't mean you're worthless. It means you have the chance to find people who will value you properly. My phone buzzed with a text from Michael. How did it go? I'm proud of you. I smiled, typing back. It went perfectly, coming home, and for the first time in my life, I truly understood what that word meant. Epilogue. 3 years later, the Holloway Community Center officially opened its doors. The ceremony was small, just staff, volunteers, and some of the families we'd already started helping. Marigold flew in from California, now 75 but still fierce in her pride for what we'd built. Your parents called me last week, she mentioned casually as we watched teenagers playing basketball in the new gymnasium. I felt my shoulders tense automatically, then forced them to relax. Oh, they wanted to know if I thought you'd be willing to reconcile. Apparently, they've seen the news coverage about the center and want to be part of your success story again. I laughed, surprised to find that the sound held no bitterness. What did you tell them? I told them that some stories end, and it's time to write new ones. Vivian appeared at my elbow, holding her 18-month-old daughter, my niece Emma, who would grow up knowing only love and support and the freedom to become whoever she wanted to be. The reporter wants to interview you, Vivian said, bouncing Emma on her hip. Something about your inspiration for the project. I looked around at the center at the counseling offices where trained professionals would help families heal, at the computer lab where kids could do homework or learn job skills, at the safe space we'd created from a place of abandonment. Tell her it's simple, I said, reaching for Emma, who came to me with the easy trust of a child who'd never learned to fear the people who loved her. Sometimes the best thing you can do for someone is show them they deserve better. As I held my niece, watching the sun set through the windows of the center, I felt the last piece of my healing click into place. I'd spent 20 years building a successful business, creating beautiful homes for others, accumulating all the external markers of achievement. But this place built from brokenness, this family chosen rather than inherited, this peace that came from finally understanding my own worth, this was what success actually looked like. The train station was still visible through the windows, but it no longer looked abandoned. It looked like what it had always been meant to be, not an ending, but a beginning. Not a place where journeys ended in abandonment, but where they began in hope. I kissed the top of Emma's head and whispered a promise. You'll always know you're loved. You'll always know you matter. And if anyone ever tries to tell you otherwise, Aunt Abby will remind them who they're dealing with. Behind me, I heard Vivian laugh. I think she's going to be just fine. I think we all are, I said, and meant it. The community center hummed with life around us, families reconnecting, children learning, broken things becoming whole again. It was exactly what I dreamed of building in that parking lot 3 years ago, a place where people could find their way home, even when home wasn't where they'd started, especially when home wasn't where they'd started. The end. This story is dedicated to everyone who has had to choose their own family, set their own boundaries, and define their own worth. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away from what's familiar and build something better. You deserve love that doesn't come with conditions. You deserve relationships built on respect, not control. And you deserve to feel proud of the strength it took to survive. If this story resonated with you, remember your past does not define your future. Your biological family does not determine your worth. And choosing yourself is not selfish, it's survival. Thank you for listening.